Lord have mercy. This is a lot of reading. It really is. Okay. So we are on 4486. A bill to amend 1964 PA 170 entitled An Act to Make Uniform the Liability of Municipal Corporations, Political Subdivisions, and the State, its agencies and departments, officers, employees, and volunteers thereof, and members of certain boards, councils, and task forces when engaged in the exercise or discharge of a governmental function for injuries to property and persons, to define and limit this liability, to define and limit the liability of the state when engaged in the proprietary function, to authorize the purpose of liability insurance to protect against loss arising out of this liability, to provide for defending certain claims made against public officers, employees, and volunteers for paying damages sought or awarded against them, to provide for the legal defense of public officers, employees, and volunteers, to provide for reimbursement of public officers and employees for certain legal expenses, and to repeal acts and parts of acts by amending section 7 as amended by 2013 PA 173, and by adding section 7D. The people of the state of Michigan enact section 7 1. Except as otherwise provided in this act, a governmental agency is immune from tort liability if the governmental agency is engaged in the exercise or discharge of a governmental function. Except as otherwise provided in this act does not modify or restrict the immunity of the state from tort liability as it existed before July 1st, 1965, which immunity is affirmed. Well, I don't know if I necessarily like the sound of any of that. The government agency is immune from tort liability. Don't know what a tort is, but I think the government should be liable if they're doing shady stuff. So we'll see what this actually means. Experts out there, please let me know, what the heck are they talking about? Because I don't necessarily want to vote for it unless okay, so this part, if it's already in place, I can't really do anything about it. And if they're amending it to make it better, cool, then yes. But I only see a couple things crossed out of this. So it says, number 2, except as otherwise provided in this section, that was crossed off, act, and without regard to the discretionary or ministerial nature of the conduct in question, each officer and employee of a governmental agency, each volunteer acting on behalf of a governmental agency, and each member of a board, council, commission, or statutorily created task force of a governmental agency is immune from tort liability. Alright, we gotta look that up. Alright, we'll quick Google search. Real quick, tort liability indicates that someone is held accountable for wrong actions. Other than under contract, torts are tied to civil court claims. It's an area of English common law meant to right a wrong violation of common law, social norms, or civil law without involving criminal punishment. Interesting. Okay, so we have rules that the government's immune to getting sued. That doesn't seem cool at all, so okay. I could say we need to amend this a little bit more, because that means they could just take advantage of people and they can't get in trouble, and governors can do shady stuff and just be like, oh well, I'm protected, I've got this random immunity. I'm gonna make sure that's not too hot. Okay, well, this is where I'm gonna get an attitude. Anywho, now that we know what tort means, tort is literally a claim that somebody did something that was not okay with common law or a civil matter and things like that. But I could be reading it wrong. Maybe it means they don't have the immunity for that, but I think it says they do. They're immune from tort liability. Okay, so anyways, going forward, the officer, employee, member, or volunteer is acting or responsibility believes he or she is acting within the scope of his or her authority. The governmental agency is engaged in the exercise or discharge of a governmental function. C, the officer's, employees, members, or volunteers' conduct does not amount to gross negligence that is the proximate cause of the injury or damage. Subsection 2 does not alter the law of intentional torts as it existed before July 7th of 1986. Number 4, this act does not grant immunity to a governmental agency or an employee of or agent of a governmental agency with respect to providing medical care or treatment to a patient, except medical care or treatment provided to a patient in a hospital owned or operated by the Department of Health and Human Services, or a hospital owned or operated by the Department of Corrections, and except care or treatment provided by an uncompensated search and rescue operation medical assistant or tactical operation medical assistant. I mean, that sounds better if they're not immune to that stuff. Oh, okay. Number 5, a judge, a legislature, and the elective or highest appointed executive official of all levels of government are immune from the tort liability for injuries to persons or damages to property if he or she is acting within the scope of his or her judicial, legislative, or executive authority. Okay, that doesn't sound cool at all, but alright. Apparently this stuff is probably already in place. Like, okay, so they're not liable for, in what way does a government official get to hurt anybody and be like, oh, that's part of the job, sorry. I thought, like, no, okay. This needs some attention. We might not be reading all the bills. 6, a guardian ad litem is immune from civil liability for an injury to a person or damage to property if he or she is acting within the scope of his or her authority as guardian or litem, however you say that. This subsection applies to actions filed before, on, or after May 1st, 1996. Number 7, the immunity provided by this act does not apply to liability of a government agency under the Miss Dig Underground Facility Damage Prevention and Safety Act of 2013. I wonder what happened with Miss Dig. PA 174 MCL 460.721 to 460.733. Number 8, as used in this section. Letter A. Gross negligence means conduct so reckless as to demonstrate a substantial lack of concern for whether an injury results. Letter B. Search and rescue operation means an action by a government agency to search for, rescue, or recover victims of a natural or man-made disaster, accident, or emergency on land or water. C. Search and rescue operation medical assistant means an individual licensed to practice one or more of the occupations listed in subdivision E, acting within the scope of the license and assisting a governmental agency in a search and rescue operation. D. Tactical operation means a coordinated, planned action by a special operations, weapons, or response team in a law enforcement agency that is one of the following. I. Taken to deal with imminent violence, a riot, an act of terrorism, or similar civic emergency. II. The entry into a building, area, watercraft, aircraft, land vehicle, or body of water to seize evidence or to arrest an individual for a felony under the authority of a warrant issued by a court. III. Training for the team. Interesting. E. Tactical operation medical assistant means an individual licensed to practice one or more of the following, acting within the scope of the license and assisting law enforcement officers while they are engaged in a tactical operation. I. Medicine. Osteopathic medicine and surgery, or as a registered professional nurse under Article 15 of the Public Health Code. Blah, 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 bunch of numbers. II as an emergency medical technician, emergency medical technician, specialist, or paramedic under Part 209 of the Public Health Code. La-di-da, bunch of numbers. I won't bore you with more. Section 7D1. This is all in bold. This act does not grant immunity to a governmental agency or employee or agent of a governmental agency with respect to conduct involving criminal sexual conduct if the governmental, well, that's good to hear, if the governmental agency or employee or agent of the governmental agency knew or should have known that the individual who committed the criminal sexual conduct had committed a prior act of criminal sexual conduct, and the governmental agency or employee or agent of the governmental agency failed to act or intervene to prevent the subsequent criminal sexual conduct. Okay. I gather that as they are not immune if they knew about it and like let it happen and things like that, like criminal sexual conduct, which is great because that is probably why this is in bold, is because it has to do with criminal sexual conduct issues and limitations. So, because I was reading this thinking like, okay, the government is immune to all these complaints, and like that would be insane. Like, why would we do that? Like that would just make them become predators knowing that they can get away with all this stuff. So yuck. Number 2, nothing in this, any previous or subsequent act limits the availability of causes of action permitted to a plaintiff, including causes of action against persons other than the individual alleged to have committed the criminal sexual conduct. Number 3, for purposes, and it stopped being bold by the way after that section. For purposes of the section, it is not necessary for a criminal prosecution or other proceeding to have been brought as a result of the criminal sexual conduct, or if a criminal prosecution or other proceeding has been brought for the prosecution or proceeding to have resulted in a conviction or adjudication. 4, as used in this section, A, adjudication means an adjudication of one or more offenses under chapter blah of the Probate Code 1939 PA 288 MCL 712A.12 712A.32. Okay, letter B. Criminal sexual conduct means conduct prohibited under section, and it lists all the penal codes to let you know what you just read about and how would you define that in all these codes. I will skip them. Enacting section 1, this amendatory act is curative, must be retroactively applies to actions pending on the effective date of this amendatory act, and is intended to express the original intent of the legislature regarding the application of the 1964 PA 170 MCL 691.1401 to 691.1419. All right, hallelujah, this is the last one, and I will stop boring you to death. Although this is quite interesting, and yeah, like I feel like I need to read a lot more of the laws and bills, and it's very interesting. And I mean, in general, we should be knowing what our rights are, and we should know what the government is allowed to do also against us, and what they're allowed to get away with legally. So, because that's literally why this is so important to vote on, because, or just to like support the government officials to vote on, because like we don't always get like a direct vote, but it's like, what can we do? We got to use our voices to change some of this stuff, because some of it is like ridiculous. Especially if you're allowed to wait 10 years for like random fraud stuff, but you only had 7 years to be able to like file a claim against sexual abuse, and like that is, I think, probably way more traumatizing. But I mean, I guess fraud will really wreck your life too, but normally that happens like after you've lived like a full life. But anyways, neither here nor there. The last one, finally. Okay, I'm gonna skip all the boring stuff. Well, I mean, maybe I'll try to skip some of these numbers this time. I was trying to be like as transparent as possible and tell you what's really in there, but now that I've read the most of them, I feel like you kind of get the gist, and you can also go look it up yourself. I'm going to be reading 4487, So if you want to go look up like what the extra amendments are and the numbers that they reference, feel free. Maybe I'll just skip over them to make this quick. Okay, so last one. The people of the state of Michigan enact section 6431. That's it. Okay, 1. Except as otherwise provided in the section, a claim may not be maintained against this state unless the claimant, within 1 year after the claim has accrued, files in the office of the clerk of the court of claims either a written claim or a written notice of intention to file a claim against the state or any of its departments, commissions, boards, institutions, arms, or agencies. Number 2, a claim or notice under subsection 1 must contain all the following. A statement, a statement of the time when the place where the claim arose, a detailed statement of the nature of the claim and of the items of damage alleged or claimed to have been sustained. C, a designation of any department, commission, board, institution, arm, or agency of the state involved in connection with a claim. D, a signature and verification by the claimant before an officer authorized to administer oaths. 3, a claimant shall furnish copies of a claim or notice filed under subsection 1 to the clerk at the time of the filing for transmittal to the Attorney General and to each of the departments, commissions, boards, institutions, arms, or agencies of the state designated in the claim or notice. Sounds really familiar, like this sounds like the last one I read. 4, for a claim against the state for property damage or personal injuries, the claimant shall file the claim or notice under subsection 1 with the clerk of the court of claims within 6 months after the event that gives rise to the claim. 5, this section does not apply to either of the following. A claim for compensation under the Wrongful Imprisonment Act. I swear this sounds exactly like the one we just read, so it must be very similar and maybe has a couple different changes. I don't know. B, a claim to which section 5851B applies. Weird. Enacting section 1, this amendatory act as curative must be retroactively applies to actions pending on the effective date of this mandatory act and is intended to express the original intent of the legislature regarding the application of the revised Judicature Act of 1961. Oh, that one was super short, so it must have just changed like a couple words or something, because the House Bill number 4487 sounded just like 4486 but way shorter. So I don't know what was up with that one, like what exactly it changed. So that was a lot. Thank you so much for listening, and like I said, please feel free to look it up yourself on our government's website, which is legislature.mi.gov, and then you can type in House Bill number 8842 is where it begins, and then all the way up to, oh my goodness, I said it backwards again, 4482 and then 4487. It goes through those, and they're all like listed right next to each other, so it's not hard to look up if you know kind of like what you're looking for. And since I repeated those bill numbers over and over again, I'm sure you can find them easily. But feel free to comment if you have any questions or concerns, and thanks for listening. Have a great day.